All right, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Welcome to our latest presentation for the Automation webinar series, hosted by Black Hills IP and Schwegman, Lundberg, and Wosner. Today's discussion is going to surround the hidden barriers to legal automation. Our panelists include Steve Lundberg, Chief Innovation Officer at SLW, Jill Young, Software Manager and Legal Systems Expert, and Peter Rubafoni, Legal Process Manager at SLW. The webinar is going to be moderated by Ann McCracken, President of Black Hills IP and former patent attorney. And now I'll hand it off to Ann. Hi, Ann. How are you today?
I am great. Thank you, Justin, and welcome to everybody. Today we're going to be talking about automating legal operations tasks, which is essential as law firms and corporate legal departments are trying to do more with less, a theme that we're hearing over and over now. And I'm looking forward to learning from the experience of a group that has embraced automation. And that's what we've assembled here today. So can we go to the next slide? First, why is there a need for legal automation? Well, there's studies that have shown that a quarter or over a quarter of legal professionals' time is spent on routine and very low value tasks. Automating these tasks will significantly reduce the amount of human labor that's needed for your department or your team, and or better yet, allow the people that are doing those low value tasks to move on to higher value, more complex, more value added tasks. So a few examples of things that are low value tasks that could be automated, just to get us in the right frame of mind here, is things like manually keying in data into electronic systems, or manually looking up information in multiple sources that could be pulled in with automation, or even simple tasks that are very, very time consuming are things like uploading documents into systems. So these are various legal operations tasks, and a lot of organizations have people spending time on items that really add to overhead and your costs. So we're going to look at how you can raise quality and lower costs with legal automation. So let's go to the next slide, please. We're in a different era than we used to be. The old way of performing paralegal and docketing operations was to be having tasks done on site. Things were very paper-based, workflows were very paper-based. There were human analysis, manual data entry, basically very resource and intensive and expensive, and that resulted in error-prone work and inconsistent work and very slow work. So the new way of doing things with legal automation is to really focus on how can we automate those routine tasks using cloud-based systems, using electronic workflows, having interoperable systems, having as much of the workflow automated as possible, and reducing the amount of customization that requires human involvement or specialized software, specialized tools that can't talk to other systems. The advantages of that, obviously, it's going to reduce costs, it's going to increase quality. So those are the things that we'll be looking at today. Next, I'm going to turn it to Steve Lundberg to get us introduced to the topic. So next slide, please.
Thanks, Ann. Welcome everybody to the webinar today. I hope we leave you with some interesting thoughts when we're done here. If nothing else, hopefully we'll confirm what you already know, which is always helpful. But we're going to learn today is, there's a lot of opportunities to automate things, but there are hidden barriers that block and reduce adoption. They come in many forms, and understanding the barriers is key to overcoming them, or at least realizing why you failed. And we'll give you some tips at the end for successful automation initiatives. We've got several different perspectives here today. We've got a law firm perspective. We've got Ann McCracken, who brings a lot of corporate experience with in her job at Black Hills IP automating corporations. and Jill Young, who also has worked on a lot of those automation projects for larger corporations. And then Peter Ribofoni, who runs the operations at Schwegman, brings a practical perspective to it as well. So we hope we give you some good information. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to use some fun analogies, metaphors today, so you can kind of have a way to bucketize, the problems you're running into. So some of you may have heard about the experiment they did with monkeys and the bananas. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that you want to treat monkeys this way, but it wasn't too inhumane. But anyways, what they did was they took a group of monkeys, they put them in a, they were in a cage. The monkeys they put a bunch of bananas at the top of a ladder. And anytime a monkey would go up to get these bananas, they would so-called the monkeys get them all wet. Monkeys don't like to be wet. So after a while, the monkeys said, no one's going to go up and get those bananas because we don't want to get wet. So they stopped any monkeys try to go up the ladder. They would stop them from going up the ladder, which makes sense because no one wants to get wet. So the next thing they did was they took one monkey out and put another monkey in that had never seen anybody get wet. And still, anybody tried to go up the ladder, that monkey tried to go up the ladder, they'd pull him down. And they swapped the monkeys out one by one by one by one till there had not been a single monkey that had ever been soaked before. They'd never seen anybody get wet, but still nobody would let anybody go up the ladder. None of the monkeys knew why anymore, why you couldn't go up the ladder. They just know, do not go up the ladder. A lot of what we've got going on, in process in companies, which ends up being slows down innovation, slows down automation, is people don't even know why they're doing things anymore. They were taught to do them. They were taught they were important, and they were probably very important when they were put in place. But then times have changed. So now it's pointless not to go get the bananas because no one's going to get wet anymore, but no one dares go up there. So the first thing we want to talk about today is like the why. Why don't we do certain things, and why do we do certain things? So if you go to the next slide, we can just talk about some examples of the lost whys. And I guess, Ann, I would turn it back to you to maybe reach out to the panelists to see if any of them have any ideas. And by the way, before we go any further, anybody has any questions, please enter them there, on your screen, and we'll try to address those as we go. Thank you.
Sure. And there's lots of examples of lost whys at the high level. Something was established in an era back when everything was paper-based. It could be that something was established to meet the need of a specific customer. That customer or that client might not even be around anymore, or that it was put in place to guard for an error that happened, and maybe even the conditions that would cause that error are no longer in existence today. There's lots of reasons. And one that I commonly see is the example of putting very factual remarks into an entry in a docketing system. And I think this practice started back in the day when everybody was working on paper files. We didn't have as much access to electronic systems or IP management systems the way we do today. And attorneys had to request the file to see what information was in the file. So instead, the remarks were put into the docket entries so the attorneys could see, or staff could see off the docket entry what was going on with the file. Well, now today, obviously, most firms are paperless, and that information about the general facts of the case are easily available. But still, that practice of putting factual remarks into the docket entries still exists and takes a lot of time and can hinder automation efforts. So, Peter, have you seen examples like this that you can share?
Thanks, Ann. The one that came to mind of a lost why, and we have a lot of these. Even when you have longevity at an organization, you still can't remember why you're doing something. that you've been doing for quite a while. One that came up recently with us is we used to have an employee who was compiling a list of issue notifications that were going to be happening the following week, and then sending an email around to all legal staff, just alerting them to these upcoming issuances. And we realized that, I'm sure there was a really good reason for this, and there's a lot of good process that was triggered by this, but it didn't require an individual to be compiling that and emailing. We could automate that and pull the same data this person was compiling and send that automatically, and achieve the same ends. And that's a good example of the lost why that we can solve that problem automatically.
That's a good one, Peter. Jill, what about you? What have you seen?
Thanks, Anne. I kind of look at this from the aspect of reporting tools and procedures that were put in place for that purpose, and clinging to our spreadsheets as opposed to the automation that's replaced it. So when we adopt systems or tools to track things that we can readily use for our analytics and our reporting purposes, a lot of people are still caught into the habit of tracking it separately in a spreadsheet in addition to the tool that's available. And so therefore we're utilizing that when we don't need to, and we should be moving on to the automation to take care of that for us.
Yes, absolutely. Steve, did you have anything else to add on this, or if not, do you want to move on to the next one?
I guess I would just comment before we move on that certainly there are a lot of, if you work in a law firm environment, and probably this is true of corporate to some degree or another, or a lot, but I'm not as familiar with that, is you will have what I will call sort of the outlier customer, which is basically in this context, it's maybe a law firm attorney, or it could be an attorney in a corporate department, or even a customer external, a client of the firm. They will have something they want done that's very, very important to them at that particular moment in time, and they will go to the docketing department or whatever department, and they'll say, we need to do this differently, and without really much analysis at all, would they just change the process, adopt it. Then that attorney is gone, or maybe the client leaves the firm, and they just keep doing it, even though there's absolutely nobody that puts any value on that. So those are examples of the lost whys. Now, why are those so important for automation? Is that when you get into automation, all these things like that you now have to automate that no one even cares about are just additional complexity that you can't even find somebody that could tell you why we need to keep doing it or not doing it. So I guess I'll wrap it up with that and move on to the next slide. So this is the stale popcorn experiment slide, which essentially has to do with the power of habit, which we all know is strong. And in this experiment, they took two groups of people. One group of people didn't normally eat popcorn at movies, and they took another group of people that always would have a box of popcorn at the movies. And in the experiment, they gave half of each group fresh popcorn and half of each group stale popcorn. And the people that didn't normally eat popcorn would not eat the stale popcorn much at all. They'd eat the fresh popcorn. And the other group that always ate popcorn ate it whether it was stale or fresh. The point is that when you look at any kind of process with fresh eyes, with eyes that aren't biased with habit, you're going to be probably more likely to pick the optimal solution, i.e. the fresh popcorn, versus just keep going, even though the solution you've got that you're using isn't any good. You know how to do it. It's force of habit, so you keep doing it. So a lot of these issues that we run into with automation have way more to do with people than they do actually the automation challenges, which are substantial, but the people present the bigger problem a lot of times because they are attached to the way they do things. Now, is this a bad thing? No, it really isn't. I mean, there was years ago, I was lamenting how hard it was to get people to change the way they did things, you know, when you're trying to innovate and you're trying to be more efficient. And so one day I was lamenting to myself again, oh, I can't, you know. And then it dawned on me that we had selected all of these attorneys and paralegals because they do things predictably the same way every time, and they are not, you know, likely to just go off and try something new that's never been tested before. So actually, it was a good thing they didn't want to change, because if they did, things might spin out of control. So I think, you know, we start from the perspective that it's good to have people that like to do things the same way every day, but then you've got to deal with how to change them. And I'll just throw an editorial comment in. What I found is that you can force people to change, and they'll complain about it. And as soon as you make the change and it's done, if you tried to go back to the old way, they would complain equally as much about going back to the old way. So it's not so much about whether it's good or better or not. It's more about, I don't want to change, which isn't bad. So you can go to the next slide. So, you know, throw out some examples of what I would call the bad habits. And I'll just kick off with the first one and let Ann take it from there. But, you know, it's a bad habit when you could stop doing it and actually save money, or you could make a change in it and it would actually be more efficient and save a lot of money. That's a perfect example of a habit that is a bad habit. Ann, you want to take it from there?
Sure. A lot of times these things fall in the category of, well, we've always done it that way. And the second bullet is where I see this often come up. So here, powerful features in a new IP management system are not being used. Instead, legacy procedures and processes that are very inefficient are being used. One area where I see that, or actually two areas where I see that, the first one would be many IP management systems today have an automated report function, yet you still have people working in those systems that are going in on a daily basis or weekly basis to generate attorney docket reports, for example, or other reports, and manually triggering those when that functionality could be set up as a scheduled report, so it didn't take the time of a person to go in and do it. Another big example I see is there are some docketing systems today that have great features for tracking references for citation purposes. I can't tell you how many times, though, I talk to people that have docketing systems with that functionality and they're not using it. They're still tracking references on complex spreadsheets, or worse yet, in files somewhere, and not taking advantage of those functions that are already built in to their system, and they just need to learn how to use them and put them into their processes and checklists and make it a part of their workflow. So that's a big one for me. Another one that I frequently see is not fixing problems at the source. And again, this ties into docketing systems. So many times a docketing system will have functionality where, let's say you enter a template and a certain series of dates launches off of that, but maybe that's not exactly the series of dates that you want to launch off of that. The best thing to do in that case is to go in and change the template so that going forward, it functions the way you want it to function. But the bad habit that I see fairly frequently is, instead of fixing the problem at the source and changing the template, the individuals will just use the template as is and then go in and delete or close out the dates that they did not want. So basically, you're taking the effort to launch something and then creating the extra effort because you have to go in and close that thing out. So those are a couple of the ones that I see. Some other common ones, exchanging information in like free form, handwritten communications, using manual labor to perform easily automated tasks, using procedures established before, wide area computer networks were available. So, Peter, how about you? What have you seen in the category of bad habits?
I have a good example, I think, and before I share that one, I will say that, stale or not, if I go to the movies, I'm eating popcorn. The fourth bullet point about, using manual labor for easily automated tasks. A good example we have would be, in our field, would be response shells to office actions received from the Patent and Trademark Office. Historically, that's been a very heavily manual task, typically a paralegal or legal assistant task. And it requires a lot of opening up of Word documents, typing in rejections, and updating claim sets. And that's a great bad habit to break, in that if you receive, these office actions are very similar. The information is very much can be dissected and populated automatically. And when we were able to shift from a bad habit of manual entry of rejections to an automated process that pulls in the rejections directly from those office actions, we were able to break that bad habit.
That's a great example. Jill, what have you seen?
Sure. I'm looking at it kind of from the perspective of when we go in to automate certain tasks. Oftentimes what we learn is that we have two different departments doubling the efforts to achieve the same outcome. And so part of the bad habit is, why are you both doing the same thing? And then figuring out how to merge those processes into one so that we get the same outcome without two different departments trying to accomplish the same thing at the same time. And so they've always done it that way. And perhaps they even came up with those procedures for two different reasons to begin with, but their outcome is the same. So the bad habit to break is to make sure that you're not doubling up on your efforts and to get the same outcome. The other one is there's often different systems within any given law firm or company. And what I've seen happen often is people will print out a report from one system, carry it over to the other department, and then they'll manually key it into their system. Well, those are kind of long gone with automation, in that with APIs, you can move that information automatically without people rekeying it. There's also import-export routines. Database access is another way that you can move the information from one system to another. So that's another bad habit that can easily be broken with automation.
Yeah, and that rekeying of information is a very prominent one that happens all the time, and it takes up a lot of manual labor to do, and really is oftentimes unnecessary. And that's a great example, Jill. So Steve, I'll give it back to you if you have any further comments on this one, or if you want to introduce the next.
Sure. I mean, I guess I'll clean up on this a little bit, and that, I think what I've seen is when people get like a new system, they'll put a huge amount of energy into kind of deploying that new system, or we get new technology, we deploy it. But what often gets shortchanged is actually re-engineering of the processes to take advantage of the new system. We've hit that a bunch of different ways, but it's in the examples we've given. But it's people kind of just run out of energy. It's so much effort just to get data ported in and stuff, that by the time they get to the point where they actually need to think about, okay, now how can I really use this to really improve my efficiency, they're sort of out of gas. Because everybody's still got their other job to do, which reminds me of, it's not a slide here, but I mean, I think it's a perfect analogy to, sort of trying to automate your systems. And it's about the mechanic and the surgeon, and the surgeon takes his car in to get it fixed, and talking to the mechanic, and the mechanic goes, He goes, I fix these engines, I change these parts, I make these repairs, I do a lot of stuff. It's pretty much exactly what you do, and the surgeon says, yeah, but can you do it while it's running? And and I think really one of the problems you have is you're trying to do all this stuff while you're still trying to run your operation. And it's not like you can take it down for a couple days to install and then put it back up. Everyone needs to keep doing this stuff. So that's tough. So let's go on to the next slide. So this is the cost issue, and this is the free diaper problem. And this stack of diapers is actually disposable diapers, so it's not really quite accurate for this metaphor analogy, or actually a real world example of misallocation. But a classic example of misallocation of resources when things are free is what happened in the Soviet Union when communism came in. Everyone, of course, decided every baby should have a diaper and they shouldn't have to pay for them. And diapers back then were cloth, they weren't disposable. But now they made diapers free, but yet it was harder to find a diaper than ever before. And after a while, they figured out that because diapers were free, people were using them for rags. And so all of a sudden, there needed twice as many diapers because now they were just being, misallocated. And I think a lot of problems we have both in law firms and in corporations is not understanding our costs very well, because it's a lot of times hard to figure out what things cost. It's really hard to cost some of these things that we want to do. But if we don't understand the cost, then we can't really make wise decisions about how to adopt a new process or whether it's worth the time and effort to do something new. There's a lot of different ways that you can lose sight of your costs. And we'll kind of, jump into this. There's other costs too. Maybe I'll mention before we get to you can go ahead and go to the next slide if you want to, Justin. But, one of the things that I see has happened over the last 5 to 10 years, which is completely understandable, but also creates unanticipated issues is you're in your organization, and you've got a cost. Maybe you've got classic one is you've got a data entry cost, and you're spending a lot of money entering data because people are sending you updates on everything that's happened, and you got to type this in. So you go, okay, I'm going to get rid of this cost. I'm going to have my supplier put in the information, and which has happened. And that's, of course, supplier is going to do that because they want to keep the business, and it's understandable why you'd want to externalize the cost and let somebody else put it in. The problem is that you didn't get rid of the cost. I mean, you just burden somebody else with an inefficient process. So like instead of automating the data entry so that you got rid of the whole manual aspect of it, you just push the manual piece somewhere else. And in a way, that's kind of, offshoring. The first wave of offshoring was about pushing, manual costs to a lower cost place that had lower manual costs, when actually automation would have been a much better way to attack it if you could. And by the way, these are difficult things to do. It's a lot easier just to externalize the manual piece. So these are not complaints. These are just observations at this point that if we could always take into account when we push something that we don't want to do anymore on somebody else without any budget to do it, you didn't really get rid of the cost. You just made it harder for your supplier to do their job. And it comes back, there's no free lunch. So that's just kind of like a big picture, look at that. And that I'll just take the first bullet here, which is, kind of the death by 1,000 cuts. Because a lot of what IP lawyers do and paralegals do only takes a minute. Everyone thinks it doesn't cost anything, but unfortunately our days are filled with things that only take a minute. So when it only takes a minute and you do it 1,000 times a year, it starts to add up to real money. So I would just say that you even if it only takes a minute, you got to try to figure out what that costs. But I'll turn it back to you, Ann.
Sure. Yeah, and there's a lot of examples of this, as we're calling it, cost blind waste. So sometimes it's the result of just staff costs not being allocated, so it's there but you don't see it. It could be that the staff has time to do it, so they don't think there's a reason to eliminate it. I like this second from the last bullet. The manual procedure was affordable in a previous era, but is now a luxury. I used to work with a woman who had a term for that. She actually called it luxury docketing. And I think that's a great term for some of these extras that sometimes as attorneys we may be asking our staff to do and not thinking about how much extra time it actually takes. Or again, and Steve was talking a little bit about externalizing the procedure to outside counsel. You know, a cost there that I don't think you mentioned, Steve, is that if the outside counsel's staff maybe is not familiar with, for example, working in the company's docketing system, there's a hidden cost there for the corporate legal department that has to check and review the work of outside counsel, correct errors, and in many instances that actually can create costs internally that are hidden and you're not thinking about. Another example of that would be law firms continuing to do things manually that could be automated, and the cost of doing that, not only for the person who's doing the manual work, but then the quality control and somebody else checking that manual work, because manual work tends to be more error prone than if it were automated. And then the lost opportunities that you have by not automating a step in the process, you then don't have an opportunity to automate something else off that step. So for example, if you have an automated workflow for your docketing, then you might be able to automate off of that a reporting out process. But if you don't take the initial step of automating, moving towards an automated docketing process, you lose the opportunity to then tie in automated steps that trigger off the different things that may come through your docketing process. Peter, how about your thoughts on this? Let's hear what you've got.
You know, I think you touched on a good one, which is reporting, you know, where the law firm and the client have to correspond. Seems to be a place where there's a lot of thousand cuts at times. It could be something like, it could be a client request for, you know, if you have an automated process and they say, oh, well, for these key cases, I'd like you to do the secondary process, maybe come into the spreadsheet and update the spreadsheet with this information that I need. And from the law firm's perspective, obviously we've now jumped out of the traditional workflow. And if we're not able to automate that, we have to manually have someone go out and identify what cases these are, catch them as they come in, and go out and update, say, a spreadsheet that we don't have ownership over. So, you know, a lot of times these can be fed in through, or can seep in through the reporting process. And a lot of them can't be automated because the need for that automation doesn't make it all the way back to the organization that is doing the automating. And it could be stuck in a department that said, oh yeah, this just is going to take a second. And they decide to go off and start doing that manually without trying to build in a process.
Good. Jill, what are your thoughts?
So continuing on with this theme of reporting, because I feel that sometimes when we internalize that to...
Ann, did we lose you there?
Pardon?
I'm still here.
Peter, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. All right, continuing on with that theme of reporting is that's, you know, the customers are always valuable and therefore customizations are sometimes inherent in that. And so that's often a request that comes across any firm, I believe, is to customer A wants to see this and customer B wants to see it this way. So part of that does come to trying to automate all of those different needs and wants and customizations. And in as much as possible, I think the key there is to try and standardize it in order to in order to not have to reinvent the wheel every time that type of a request would come through. So I think sometimes we have to enlarge our understanding of what the actual request is, and then automate and standardize that as much as possible to make that not a cost waste, and that we can still provide it in a reasonable automated way.
So it sounds like people really need to develop a mindset of thinking about costs when you're thinking about legal operations, which historically may not have been the way people have looked at things, but that is much, much more important. And when you start to look at things through those glasses, then you start to see these hidden costs and these opportunities to eliminate waste with automation. Steve, I'll go back to you.
Sure. There was a question that came in, which is, the question is, could we, from a technology company point of view, expect automating the task would reduce the patent prosecution cost per case? You know, the short answer to that is absolutely. In the long run, all this automation ends up allowing us to do things more cost effectively for the customer. So yes, you would. Now, whether it's a tit for tat, one for one, every little task that gets automated drops the cost for a particular customer, maybe not, but I think sometimes it actually is. But I think the more important thing is that the more things get automated, the lower the cost is, and the easier it is for everybody to deliver the product at a lower price. Peter, did you want to answer that question too?
No, I think you answered it perfectly. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, all right. So we'll go on to the next slide. We got, just time-wise, we've got about 20 minutes left to go here. So, you know, this is the story of the scorpion and the frog, which probably a lot of people have heard. So basically goes that the scorpion needs to get across the river and ask the frog to take him over there. And the frog says, well, you know, I'm not too confident I want to do that because you could sting me. And if you did that, we'd both die. You'd drown and I'd die. And Scorpion says, well, I would never sting you, you know, while you're taking me across the river. So off they go. Halfway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog. The frog says, why did you do that? And the scorpion says, it's in my nature. You know, and I think the point of this is that there's a lot of cases where there's a lot of scorpions out there that can kill automation projects or make them harder to implement. And they're all quite understandable. But also the scorpion needs to get across the river, and hopefully the scorpion won't, you know, kill the frog while we're going. I mean, we're in a constant change, you know, a state of change in terms of automation in the law firm profession. It's not like automation isn't new. It's been going on, you know, probably from the dawn of the legal profession. And the more recent innovations are giving us new opportunities we haven't had before, but everyone is going to have to adopt these things over time, and whoever gets to them first is going to have an operational advantage for a period of time. So it behooves the scorpion to try to not to sting the frog. Unfortunately, the scorpion will keep stinging the frog, and we just have to figure out a way to get across the river anyways. But you know, it's not that people want to kill projects. It's just there's so many barriers. So when it comes to this, so if you go to the next slide, you know, why do we kill it? I mean, there are just a zillion reasons. A lot of them are, some of them are technical, and we're going to talk about those after this slide, and how to overcome the technical barriers. But a lot of them really have to do more with just the will to get it done. And I'll just start out by saying, you know, like a lot of times it's just like overwhelmingly difficult to automate certain things. And one reason for that in many law firms is that over centuries, you know, I mean, people have gotten into the habit of customizing everything down to the gnat's eyelash because humans are incredibly customizable. I mean, one thing you learn in automation, if you've done it a lot, is that people are just so incredibly versatile. And that's the beauty of human beings, is you can tell them to change something and they can start doing it instantly. It's not that easy when you got automation, because you want to change an automated process. You can't just walk up to the computer and say, start doing this differently tomorrow. I mean, you have to reprogram it. So, I mean, humans are beautiful. They can do things so many different ways. Problem is, now you have literally in any given organization, if you're starting from scratch, you have a lot of people that have a lot of things they like done a certain way. And to try to get them all to give those things up can be extremely difficult. And many of them are very valuable to them and to their customers. So, you know, you start from that. And I'll pass it over to Ann to go around the horn.
Sure. There's a great quote that I refer to often from Jeannie Rometty, the former CEO of IBM. She was talking about AI at the time, but it applies equally here just to automation in general. And she says, one of the reasons why some people say they haven't gotten as much value from AI or automation is that the workflow didn't change. You have to reimagine the kind of work and how it should be done for this to work best. And we think about this, again, in my context, in the docketing workflows. You can't take automation and just drop it in the middle of a very manual workflow and expect everything to work and be successful. That can really kill automation. You have to look at, for example, let's say the sources and the format of the data coming into the docketing process. It's surprising, but I still once in a while run into people who get their US patent correspondence by paper. And if you're going to move to an automated docketing system, obviously you have to look at the source, get the same information, but you get it electronically rather than on paper. Seems simple, but this is a step that hinders automation for some people, or the format of that data. And then also looking downstream, what happens after the automation in the workflow that you're dealing with. So what are the requirements of the people that are going to be receiving the information that's been processed? It doesn't do much good if you automate docketing, but then you don't have a process to somehow report that to the staff that need it to then report out to the law firm's clients, for example, and the staff then still have to go and download the documents or get the information themselves. You need to think about how you pass that information on to the next step. So it's really, really important to look at the whole workflow and how that automation that you're building fits into that workflow in order for it to be successful and not kill that aspect of the process that you're automating. Lots of other things here. I'm going to turn this to Peter to see if you've got examples of anything else on this list.
You know, one thing that jumped to mind was a lot of times the existing process is, you know, maybe a person intricately involved in making that process a success. And there's some worry that their value will be diminished in a new automated process where they're not pulling the levers. I see that a lot where even when someone doesn't like the process that we currently have and they're doing too much, you know, taking themselves out of the equation is harder than fixing it.
Mm-hmm. True. Jill, what are your thoughts?
So one of the barriers to this that I've encountered is that I think you kind of spoke to it, Anne, but is jumping in the middle and trying to automate something that isn't necessarily your best starting point. And in light of that, looking at the entire process and mapping it out and flow charting it so that you can pick the low-hanging fruit to start with is an important aspect of when you're trying to approach automating any task. And I know, Anne, you're really good at whiteboarding all of this. I've seen you whiteboard your processes before, and that really is a very useful thing to help look at all of the different components of that process. Some of them you can immediately say, hey, we can automate that piece. And maybe there's still a manual start to it and a manual finish to it. But through that, you end up getting the whole process automated eventually. So that's one of the things that is helpful in solving that. The other thing, and I know, Peter, you just spoke to this too, but I think that's a big, huge thing I've always encountered in automating tasks is you come in and you take a department, and I have a specific example of I was to go in and automate a lot of the word processing processes for a company. And I think I got the name of Grim Reaper anytime I would come around to talk with people as to what their procedures were. I was met with a lot of resistance. And I think in that there has to be a lot of reassurance that there's other things that people can do that will add value, and let's get rid of the things that are tedious and mundane. And that always has been a big hurdle, I think, that I've had to cross.
Yeah, you know, and an example of that I saw a couple of years ago, I was working with a large company who had a fantastic, well, still do have a fantastic paralegal with, 20 plus years experience. And talking about the tedious and mundane, she was spending probably a quarter of her day uploading documents into a DMS. This really, really valuable person in the organization was doing that very mundane and automatable process. So yeah, those things you really have to look at. Another thing that is important here is standardization. The lack of standardization can be a killer for automation, and that's at a lot of different levels. You see law firms, for example, with multiple offices, and each office has a different set of procedures, or even within a single office for a law firm, different attorneys have different procedures or different procedures for different clients. And that can be hard to sort through, and it can kill automation. But if you can focus on the core part, there's generally a part of the procedure that's going to be common across offices, across clients, across attorneys, whatever it is, and peel off the part that's more of the personalized procedure and split those two things out. That can help a lot, because that lack of standardization is another big killer for automation. Steve, I'll turn it back to you.
Sure, yep. And I'll have a few more things to add to this, and then we'll move on to the next slide. But, I think one thing that's not as apparent to folks, unless they're in the industry and they're looking at all these opportunities to automate, is the entire ecosystem of IP is highly siloed. And we're just now starting to get to the point where everything can get connected together better. There are, fortunately, there aren't too many Scorpion IP system providers, although there are some who don't provide good APIs, actually try to prevent interconnectivity, especially if it's somebody they perceive as a potential competitor. And all of this really just kills the frog and the scorpion. And I'm hoping that the importance of APIs and open systems will dawn on some of these companies. But ones that do a great job that I can name, without saying that this is exclusively, but I mean, I think CPA Global has been really great with APIs they've offered, to our firm with in Foundation IP, and I know they've been terrific to give API access. I think it's a powerful part of what they do. Patrick's has also got a really great API. App Calls got a good API. CPI Computer Packages, offers some good APIs, and they work with competitors. We're quasi-competitors or frenemies. So, you know, what I would really do if I was out there and I wanted to buy a system or get in bed with a company, the first thing I'd ask them is, are you going to force me to just work with you on everything, or are you going to connect to the rest of the world? And that's a key question, because if they're not willing to do that, then, you know, that's a huge hidden cost of doing business with those folks, is being trapped in their ecosystem, and lack of API connectivity. Somebody asked a question about, you know, what automation tools we recommend. You know, I'm not, I can't answer that question in terms of just a general purpose automation tool. I know there's some great ones out there. We tend to, at Schwegman, use, most of our solutions are pretty proprietary, but we do work with a lot of, you know, like in terms of connectivity solutions. I'm not talking about, we use Foundation IP, that's our primary database, but we have other stuff too. But so that works great for us. But I'm not sure what other sort of process automation stuff people are using to connect stuff together. But what's really missing in the IP world is automated data exchange that could really help save us a lot of labor. One other thing, you know, I've just mentioned while we're, you know, here is, you know, there's really no reason that anybody should be doing any kind of US docketing manually anymore. I mean, that is fully automatable. There are people out there that are doing it, and fully, our firm does 90% of all of our US docketing is processed within 10, 15 minutes of when we get it. And it's all stuck into our system, and all the, you know, we've got a lot of the reporting going automatically. That is fully automatable with a super high degree of accuracy and reliability. So if you've got people sitting around typing in, you know, if they have to spend any time at all doing US docketing, that's too much time. They shouldn't be doing that. And they'll never keep up with an automated process in a million years on cost. It's just impossible. Other areas are also getting automated, you know, on a pretty rapid basis. But these things are incredibly complicated, but once you get them down, they, you know, it's a very predictable process. So go to the next slide. So now we kind of got some, I guess I'd call them some tips. I'll start out with the first one here, because I think it's very important. You know, automation is not like a one-time event that, you know, a company can say, okay, I'm going to bring in some automation experts and they're going to automate me, and then they're going to go away and everything's going to be cool. That's not the way automation works. And in a way, what you have to think about automation now is that it's now a department. I mean, you don't just take, you know, 20 professionals and replace them with a computer system. You know, what you end up doing is, you know, you first of all, there's not going to be any massive dislocation of any IP professionals, because this automation stuff takes a long time. And as it chugs along, other jobs are created to help with the automation process. So over time, pretty much everyone in the industry is going to keep being in the industry. It's just that the industry will be outputting twice as much stuff with the same number of people 10 years or 20 years from now, say, than it is now. It's not that people are going to go away, it's that the productivity is going to go up. But you have to have a group in your organization, even if it's one person, who's just always tending to your automation. You can't just set something up and then it just runs. It's a little bit of plate spinning in there, like anything. You know, you get the plate spinning, you got to keep making sure it's spinning. And once you do, it's very efficient, but it's not a one-step process and then you walk away from it. You have to keep working on it, keep adjusting it, keep finding the places where you can improve. And one area I see a lot of problems in is people set up an automated process and they walk away from it and it's got problems that could be fixed with a little bit of effort, but no one wants to go back and deal with it. And so then it stays that way for years. So then I'll turn it over to, I know Jill definitely is a big proponent of item number 2 on this list.
Better to chip away than bite off more than you can chew. I spoke to this a little bit in the last segment, but yes, if you try to do too much all at once, that's almost assured failure. it's better to look at the processes and start again, like I said, with the low-hanging fruit, so that you can work your way towards what will encompass the more complex things in the end. So when we're talking about the simple things, it's taking whatever someone in a department does, looking at their manual process and looking at all the components of that, and then starting with, okay, let's take this one thing that you're doing right now manually, and we're going to automate that. And then once we've proven that that's going to work and going to fit into the scheme of things here, then we're going to take the next chunk. And so I think as you take it in that type of a procedural way of automation, you're going to get the most success that way, rather than looking at the whole and saying, first of all, where do I even begin? But then you're going to dive into the most complex things and not accomplish the small, simple things.
So it's really a process of continuous improvement, and you're looking at the people, you're looking at the process and the workflow, you're looking at the data. And Steve, I've heard you ask this question many times in the context of the firm, and that is, can this be automated? Looking at all those pieces and asking that question, and then picking one off and then picking another one off, and just iterating quickly, and then getting the people on board as well. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Jill, did you have more on these bullets that you wanted to add, or Peter?
I would just say one thing that I've run across, and I'm looking at the bullet that says, educate your team on what is possible. Sometimes you don't have because you don't ask. And I see people often, I will step into a situation where we're looking at the things they do because they're overburdened by all of the things they're doing. And we'll take a process, and they've never had that automated because they've never asked, or they've never understood that, why are you still doing that? Because that's something that we could very easily fit into the structure of how we've got things currently set up in automation. So I think that's a big one there. And that kind of goes across a whole company or a firm, in that you've got to be communicating with each other, and you've got to be asking the questions both back and forth. Is I need to dig into you and say, what are you doing that I can help with? And if you're doing something that seems very rote, and I do it over and over again the same way, why do I bring that to the automation team and say, can you help me with this? And I find that's a big one often, is you don't have because you don't ask.
Say, Ann, there's a few questions here I think I'd just take up real quickly before we finish. So, I think, open systems, which is something that, we're really interested in at the firm, and I think the industry as a whole should be very. So one of the questions is about whether the USPTO, will open up their systems for data interchange with commercial systems, and if not, what is the barrier? I can't speak for the USPTO. I think they've done as good a job as they can with the resources they have, and they've been doing a lot of stuff lately, which is helpful. I think one of the things is that I think is important to understand when it comes to there's kind of a two-way pipe for USPTO. One way is the data comes out of the USPTO and goes into firms and corporations around the world, and even other PTOs. And then data goes into those systems from, people filing papers and other places. That the biggest issue currently, I think, is getting data that is like for internationally speaking, at least the USPTO, if you're in the United States, it's pretty easy to get your data real time, if you will. But the rest of the data around the world is hard to get on a timely basis if you're trying to automate your processes. You're having to take a daisy chain, a bucket brigade approach to that, goes to the foreign agent, comes back to you. That part is, that's completely missing, for the most part, other than you can get some real-time data out of, the global access. But a lot of that's even not very reliable yet. But I think what I'm trying to say here is that just getting the data from the USPTO is only like a little bit of the battle, because once you get it, then you have to figure out what to do with it. And there's so many factors that go into automating a workflow out of USPTO data that aren't related to the USPTO data, but are related to other things that have happened external to that data, or just require information that doesn't exist in the USPTO data itself. So it's not just, the first step is getting the data so you can work with it, and then to figure out what to do with it. But if you can't even get it to begin with in, you know, in a formatted and, you know, typed form, it's pretty difficult to do anything. But I think the USPTO could get there pretty quickly in terms of, I mean, frankly, they're there for pushing the data out. In terms of connecting it to those systems, I mean, it's, anybody can get the data. It's just that the system providers don't have the smarts in their systems to do anything with it other than to maybe present to an operator a list of things they can docket, and maybe with real primitive choices. But other people have automated it completely. Then you get, you talk about what IPO, AIPLA could do. I think they should definitely create a standard for data exchange, and they should then really work hard to try to get that enforced and implemented. So then the one last question here is, you know, what job qualification skills are required for a position for automation? You know, it's interesting. We've been able to get people of all different stripes to be helpful in automation. You know, a number of the people that would, you know, we have working for us in automation are computer programmers and skilled system people. But a lot of the other people are more what I would call system configuration folks. And a lot of them started out as paralegals, but they show an inclination towards being able to work with, you know, computers and technology. So a lot of what people do is they configure systems versus program systems. There's a lot of very complex configuration rules that you have when you're automating things. So we have a lot of people that sit around, but their job is to configure systems, and they can be paralegals. They don't have to have a technical background. They can be really anybody that has a knack for working with a computer. So that's the answer to that question. I think we're pretty much out of time, but we do have time for a couple more questions if anybody has one. So,
Peter, did you have a comment on a question? I think I saw a note in there.
That was already answered. Thanks, Ann.
Okay. So at the beginning of the program, we said that, or I said that automating legal operations tasks is important as law firms and companies try to do more with less. Today, we talked about asking why, so that you make sure that as you try to automate tasks, you're not adding additional complexities to your automation, and maybe it's something that's not even needed. So ask the why. Watch out for bad habits that often cause people to do things manually that could easily be done with automation. And then develop a cost-focused mindset and start thinking about the costs of your operations tasks. And then finally, don't kill off automation. Instead, ask if something can be automated. If you can take those 4 things into your daily operations, you'll be surprised just even a year from now when you look back on the way your operations have advanced from where they are today. So thank you everybody for participating today. Jill, Peter, Steve, any final comments?
for me, thanks. Just thanks everybody for attending.
All right,
Thanks,
thank you,
everyone.
everybody. The slides and the audio from this will be available on our Black Hills IP website in a few days. So check back if you'd like to have the slides.